Look at that chat, so cute. Um, so hi, okay, we're gonna start over. My name is Ingrid Chen, and I am the founder and CEO of Praise Shadows, which I started in 2018. And I pivoted during the pandemic to create as an art gallery in the Boston area. So today we opened Praise Shadows Art Gallery in the Coolidge Corner neighborhood of Brookline, Massachusetts. And I'm thrilled that everyone is here. I see faces or names that I know very well and some names that I don't know as well. But we appreciate all of your support. Today, we opened Jarrett Key's solo show, which is titled Chosen Family. And it is on view through January 3rd. And we are going to be open from Wednesdays through Sunday from 11 to 6. Please come by, tell us what you think, or if you don't feel comfortable coming or you can't come, you can definitely check it out on our website and then link to our Artsy where we have images as well. So tonight is really our opening event for not just this exhibition, but also for the gallery. We had this great event a couple weeks ago where the Guerrilla Girls joined me for a talk. And that was just an incredible way of gathering and kind of telling people what the point of view of this gallery is. And the point of view is mine. I get, I get to decide what I want to show. And honestly, what this is I'm a woman of color. I work with a lot of artists who are women or people of color or people who just care about these issues and what we're facing. Over the pandemic, I was doing a lot of talking and a lot of listening with curators and artists and museum people. And what I realized at that point was that people were looking more locally and more regionally at where they were going to experience art because we can't travel all the time now to New York or Los Angeles or Berlin or Hong Kong as much as we all would love to. I was raised in Brookline. I moved back here last year. And what happened was I was walking my daughter home one day and I noticed that this store was for lease. And that was only a few months ago. So this mad dash to the finish today has been such an incredible experience. I met Jarrett on Zoom first in early August and had this really lovely studio visit. And I just knew that Jarrett had to be the first artist for the whole space. I'm so thrilled that Jarrett agreed. And as we were planning the show, I wanted to think about somebody who we could gather with Jarrett to have a conversation. And I was really lucky about a year ago, perhaps, to meet Tani, and through our friend Ben Sloat, who heads up the Leslie MFA program. And so I connected them and they've had a couple of great conversations, but now we're here sharing it with all of you. So please put your questions in the Q&A and or the chat. We will have time in the last 15 minutes to address some of those questions for Jarrett. And I'm going to disappear in a few minutes, but just so that everybody knows, and we'll put it out in the chat as well, our website is praiseshadows.com. And you can definitely follow us on Instagram as well, which is praise.shadows.art. All right, I'm just going to briefly introduce our two guests, but you'll hear a lot more about Jarrett. So I'm just going to skip over it and say that Jarrett is a Providence-based artist, just received their MFA from RISD. And I'm really honored that we are working together. And this is Jarrett's first solo show since graduating. So thank you so much. We had the best time installing yesterday. And, during COVID pandemic, it was crazy, but it's just so much grace in this human being. So thank you. And Tani, I'm going to read this a little bit, but Ellen, we met in Boston when she was the curator at the ICA, Boston. She is now in Washington, D.C. and is the 2020 to 2022 A.W. Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts in DC. So I'll let the two of them get on with it. I'll see all of you back. But first, we're gonna have a little toast. I sent champagne to these two. So since we can't gather in solo cup, Jarrett, can you unmute?
It's a ceramic. This is my ceramic solo cup.
Okay.
Yeah, look, this is my big drinking cup, like yours.
Ellen, can you, there you go. And if you guys at home are also with a drink, please join us. But since we can't gather and drink in person and, you know, have the usual wonderful time we would at a gallery opening, I asked the two of them to pour a little glass. So cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank
Congrats.
Cheers. Yes.
Okay, have a fun talk. Bye.
Thanks, Ing. And hi, everybody. It's really lovely to see familiar names and new names to celebrate the opening of Praise Shadows and Jarrett's exhibition, Chosen Family, which I'm thrilled to talk about with you. And I guess I'll just jump into it.
Let's do it.
All right. So
thank you guys for having me. Also, this is amazing. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Jarrett, I was kind of going back to some of our conversation notes and just by way of sort of introducing the tenor of our conversation today, I wanted to call up something that you wrote in your artist statement on your website, where you describe your art practice as manifesting a journey to understand freedom through three lenses: through survival, through transformation, and through celebration, which I will say has to be like an optimistic lesson of 2020. But yeah, with those sort of three tenets in mind, I'd like to have you walk us through this new body of work that you've produced for this show, which for those of you who aren't familiar, Jarrett will share some images, consists of multi-part pieces in various panel configurations, diptychs, triptychs, that address collectively imagined Black joy. I just would love to hear from you about the antidote that represents for us.
Yeah, so hey everyone at home, I hope everyone is doing well and it's feeling good. So I'm Jarrett Key, I'm in Providence right now. I can start with some images, but why don't I just start like how this body of work got started. So the works are on cement, and I just graduated RISD in May of this past year. So for the last 2 years, when folks came into my studio, and when folks come into my studio now, I ask them to close their eyes and imagine a Black person. Great. And then I'm like, cool, open your eyes. Imagine a Black person in an environment that's specific. I was like, great, open your eyes. Now, where did you see that Black person? Was it someone specific? And oftentimes people say, oh, I saw a Black person playing basketball. I saw a Black person, you know, walking by a bodega. I saw, someone literally said, I saw a Black person in prison. But all of the various places that Black folks appeared in their imagination were in urban spaces, spaces defined by cement. And so that sort of became, you know, and so I sort of ran with that. The work themselves, become really important gestures in terms of performance for me. The whole process is about, I build my substrate, I add medium to the substrate, I add the pigment to the substrate, and I carve, making relief and making images all at the same time. And yeah, should I show images now? Is that a good time?
Yeah, let's start with something to look at.
Great, okay, cool. Great, can everyone see these images?
Yep.
Great, so I'm actually gonna start with the big one. So some of the images, can everyone see this? You should be able to. So the body of work featured in this show features three of my really good friends, including, and then me, my friend Dee Walsh, Sharina Gordon, my twin brother, John Key, and I. And I think Chosen Family becomes a really important title for me because it's the way that I think about these people. Everyone has, you know, not everyone has a biological family. I do, and I'm blessed that I do. But even outside of my biological family, there are people that can hold you down, people that you share love with, you share your space with, people that you're willing to protect. And these are these people. And so it was important for me to think about, how can I show these folks and then also imagine an environment for them. So the way that it started is I approached Sharina and Dee and John. I was like, can you talk to me about, you know, a memory, a place that feels really important to you? So for Jonathan, that place, so this is John's bust. And for John, it was a pond. So John and I grew up in rural Alabama, and there was this pond in a pasture that was sort of in between our house and my grandparents' house. And this pond became like, you know, this space in between, this liminal space in between. And it's really beautiful, and I'm really excited about it. But the pond, you know, each painting has its own color. I feel like this pond is like mostly blue and green. And then as we move to Sharina, this is the bust of Sharina. Her painting is Jupiter Farms, which is based in Florida. So all of these places are real places that relate to the bust portrait. So this painting actually incorporates sort of these naseberries, which are specific to Florida, where Sharina grew up. And there's also this sort of twinning of a pine tree that happens in the center of the frame, which I got really excited about when Sharina sent me all the images. So I sort of composed all of these frames from real things. This is my bust. This was actually the first one I did. And I accompanied my bust with a series of sort of, it's the woods back home. So back home there is, in Alabama, you know, the landscape is defined by pine trees. I think it's called the longleaf southern pine tree. So they're really, really tall, skinny pine trees that are everywhere. So there's pine straw everywhere. And so we had these woods back home that, you know, that were full of them. And they were full of pecan trees also. And so this becomes emblematic for me, just like imagining myself walking through those woods as a kid and just thinking about the importance of this kind of mythical, crazy tree. The pine tree, actually, when it catches on fire, the sap inside sparks, it explodes. It's like a firecracker. And so I just think the pine tree is just such a beautiful object and tree. And it's so emblematic of, you know, my idealization of what I imagine Alabama is. So the last one is my friend Dee's, and this is Dee's bust. And this is Prairie Play, which actually I asked Dee, I was like, so Dee is from Champaign, Illinois, and Dee, you know, they are surrounded by prairies. And so Dee was telling me this story about when they were a kid, there was this prairie and playground that all of the neighborhood kids would go to. So it was sort of a treat to be able to go to Prairie Play after school. And so everyone was like, oh, I'll meet you at Prairie Play. And so that was just like this beautiful short story that Dee told me. And I really was attracted to the image that they sent simply because of the wildflowers and the colors and sort of the kind of depth. You actually get to see where the root hits the ground. And, you know, I don't see that many paintings like that, you know? And so that's really exciting to me. I think each painting has a specific perspective. I'm imagining in this painting, Dee is kneeling next to the flower. You know, I'm imagining in this painting, I'm walking through the woods. I'm imagining this painting, actually, there's a story where I actually fell into the pond and John was like running behind me. And then I was like, John, don't come. Like I slipped inside. And so this is literally actually me inside the pond looking back at John. And this one is Sharina actually looking up, about to grab one of the berries off the tree. And so that becomes really important. But so as we have these real spaces with real people, I wanted to create a space where we can all be together. It's COVID, it's actually quite difficult to actually find spaces to be together, particularly when we all live in different parts of the country right now. So these imaginary spaces in this painting becomes like really emblematic of the larger series. Many of the spaces that I paint are imaginary. I'm thinking about, you know, when you close your eyes and you imagine if we connote Black bodies being stuck in urban spaces, what comes to mind? And at the flip side of that, what comes to mind when you imagine a Black person on their own land, truly free without high surveillance, being able to really just enjoy their time? And I feel like that seems so simple. But right now, you know, when we think about the beginning of COVID, in New York City, for example, you know, white folks were able to be in Washington Square Park and the police handed them masks when they were outside without them. However, in Brownsville and Brooklyn, right down the street from where I lived for 5 years, Black people were being harassed by the police for not having masks on. And so why is it difficult for Black folks to be in public spaces? And how do we actually create that space and freedom for ourselves? I think these paintings in this imaginary space, tend to idealize and create a future that I want for my friends and for my family.
Jarrett, can I interrupt you quickly to ask some pressing questions?
Yes, great. How am I gonna stop sharing?
So thank you for that gloss over the work and kind of where it's coming from. There are a lot of things that came to mind as you were reflecting on the origin of this project. And one of the questions I think that unfolds into others has to do with the relationship of memory and a kind of embodied experience, or a kind of also like an optical, a visual impression of being in a place, which helps us imagine it in the future or imagine it and call it up in the present. And the stylistic quality of the works, in the sense that you're using, you know, techniques of paint application and a certain range of colors that recalls for many Impressionism. I'm acknowledging one of the questions in the chat here. And to think about what you said too about certain bodies being subject to surveillance and certain bodies not being subject to surveillance, and how Impressionism's optical effects both obscure the kind of clarity of identification and the knowledge therein, and also sort of agitate the visual field in other directions that unfold one's visual perception into more of an imaginary realm or something related to memory. Because I'm thinking about how you describe these landscapes as being provided to you through photographic means, and also probably through narratives of your chosen family who have described their significance to you, and how in the process of translation, in making the work, you've really taken a crisp, clear image and roughed it up, so to speak. And so I wonder if you could, sort of branching off of that, share your relationship to Impressionism, you know, a painting movement that arises at the same time as the photographic technology, associated with the birth of modernism, and to some of the material techniques that are at work in the actual making of the paintings.
Absolutely, thank you. So when we think about, I mean, you really just killed that brief summary about how we got into Impressionism. But when we think about the gestures that make Impressionism, it's a collection of various specific marks that are built up in order to give the illusion of detail, you know? And I feel like the cement paintings sort of do the opposite of that. While they rely formally and sort of referentially, they rely on themes from Impressionism, you know, scenes of leisure, colors, understanding like, have you seen Black folks in these same kind of paintings? And actually making that relationship very clear through compositions, through imagery, through color. But sort of doing the flip side of what Impressionism does in terms of the medium. So when I create the cement slabs, I'm actually working in the cement while it's wet. I'm building a slab, I'm building using, so a lot of my materials actually tell you a lot about my personal narrative. My dad is a construction worker, is a carpenter. So I grew up working construction with him. So working on roofs, doing tiles in a bathroom, doing whatever he tells me to do. And so the cement building using the tar paper, I build my tray, I pour the cement, I have a wire mesh that I put inside to hold it together. And I'm actually carving into the surface. So unlike Impressionism, through a bit of relief, I'm actually giving detail. So I'm doing the opposite. Then as the cement is still wet, I'm applying material. So I'm mixing pigment, mediums to the material while it's wet. And then after it dries, within an hour, it gets hot. And then I continue to add more and more medium on top. But I still have my surface is not even. My surface is, in some ways I'm drawing in the surface with various tools in order to build the image first. And then I'm applying color second.
Can we talk a bit about the color ranges that you use and thinking about different kinds of chromatic moods, different emotions that are associated with these particular kinds of colors, and the way that they, at least for me, like really sort of invoke this leisurely feeling of being surrounded by, I think of smell, like I have a kind of like synesthetic response in a lot of ways to the places that your paintings evoke, and my own memories with places like that. Like I can imagine the smell of a pine tree's sap, right? And so I'm curious to know, because there's so many, like a huge range of brown, green, and blue at play in these works, which really links them all together and makes for, sort of unified imaginary outdoor gathering in the final triptych. But I'd love to hear a bit more about
Color
choices there.
Yeah, so I feel like many painters, have favorite painters and they look at their palettes and like, wow, like, why do I feel some type of way when I look at this? What's actually bringing out the color for me? And so the painters that I'm looking at are Manet, Monet, Renoir, and Klimt. And I think specifically Klimt's use of these very, in most cases, very saturated colors that stack together in order to build both naturalism and kind of imaginary spaces all in one frame is very much what I'm interested in. Is very much what I think the paintings are doing. So you get to have a green that feels like a real green for grass in relationship to something that feels softer, something that feels faded, like a memory, something that feels worn away. Memories are not perfect capturings of a time. We actually watch, as we move past a memory and we have space from a memory or from an event, that memory fades over time. And I feel like similarly, even for a photograph, like when I constructed Jupiter Farms to photograph the image of for Sharina, the painting for Sharina, that was actually a collection of several different photographs. And so actually constructing this idea of this memory, this idea of an experience becomes really important. And therefore the colors connote nostalgia, but at the same time, they feel more sincere than that. They feel earnest. They feel as if they have time. And that's what's important to me. They carry time.
I'm also thinking about the way that the the rough edges of the works and their sort of fragmentary appearance connote a materiality of decay, right? And almost as if the texture of the image is slightly faded. And then I wonder too, thinking about this relationship of a concrete slab in a city to, by contrast, entablature or tombstone, these shared formats where that surface is inscribed with different kinds of meanings, right? We walk across a concrete square on the sidewalk and maybe we see someone's inscription on it that's unofficial. Whereas when, we're navigating a cemetery, we see a different kind of memory rendered permanent in that. So I'm curious to know too, how you seem to be balancing memory, memorialization, and maybe mourning, and also hope at the same time.
Well, I think it goes back to sort of, and maybe we're going to talk about this later. I think the thing that I think a lot about is, specifically me, and I think a lot of my Black friends specifically, is, we're getting together, we're having a good time, we're laughing, and then we hear on the news something tragic happened. someone got shot by the police, someone is killed, by the police. And, what are we supposed to do? How do we actually continue to experience joy and enjoy our company with each other? Imagine, be present with each other. Imagine happiness for ourselves in the face of so much trauma, in the face of mourning. It becomes this very specific disidentification, this very specific flipping back and forth of reality. And I think the objects do that. There becomes like a real soul to them in that way, because they are not these simple didactic pieces. Yes, I want you to think about when you look at them, oh, cement cities? Oh, but they're Black people that are in rural spaces. They're in landscape spaces with grass. Wow, like, oh, what's going on there? Oh, but the edges, that sort of makes me think about the 10 Commandments. Oh, but that sort of makes me think about, like there's so many things that can spur. And I think that becomes important. There is something, I had a conversation with Jennifer Packer.
I was about to bring up her work.
Oh,
I was thinking of her.
It's like, we can't even not now, we're talking about like funeral flowers. And, Jennifer was like, when are Black folks actually free? Are we free when we die? Is that the ultimate, are we all free when we die? And I was like, ooh, that's like really deep for, 2 p.m. Like, like, I'm just trying to get a cut right now. But I mean, there is something real about that. Like, freedom is such a specific yearning. Like, as human beings, we all want to feel free. And that becomes something that we're willing to die for. So the stakes become so high. And just imagining Black people unsurveilled, on their own, living beautifully, living joyfully, without fear, without violence, without threat, without trauma.
That's a beautiful reflection, and it makes me think about escape as well, whether it's a sort of spatial escape to another physical place, or an escape into one's own mind and one's own memory. And I wondered, part of what I was thinking about in looking at some of the expressions on the busts that you've made is what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and what are some of the tones of their gestures and expressions, because they're certainly not expressionless faces, and they're looking in certain directions, and the landscapes that they're paired with illustrate a certain perspective in space. And I'd love to know more about how you sort of oriented these sitters.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like the most important thing, I think about in the history of portraiture, and we could even be more specific, I think, in the history of like, Black artists who do portraits, there becomes this interest of whether or not the sitter should look at the viewer or not look at the viewer, and which one holds more power. And so I think, when you think about Kerry James Marshall does this, my brother John Key does this. I mean, there's like lots of examples that, Kara Walker does this from time to time too, where you have the viewer, the person in the image looking directly at them. There's agency in that. And I was like, okay, cool, I get that there's power there. However, I was like, what about this ambivalence to the viewer? What about if the person, the bust, is actually preoccupied with the thing that they care about? When do we, and I was like, oh, wait, isn't that more powerful to have my friends not in forever now, now that I've made this image of them, forever constantly staring at someone, but instead constantly just thinking, like reflecting, like Sharina looking up and being like, wow, look at that Blaze Maysbury. That's just like so cute. I love that. I can look at that forever. or D looking down, we don't even see D's eyes. D's looking down at a flower, and just like a simple, slight smirk, a little bit, like that simple pleasure. Same thing with John, like simple, small smirk. And for me, mine is the only one that almost feels like I'm looking directly at the viewer. And I am almost looking directly at the viewer, except my head is slightly tilted and I have a slight kind of small smirk. You know what I mean? And so I feel like the relationship between the bust becomes their relationship between nature, their relationship between themselves and nature. And that becomes a depiction that we get to witness versus the viewer's relationship to them or their relationship to the viewer.
This is interesting because what you're talking about is a kind of freedom that's found in the experience of aesthetic pleasure, right? In terms of like depicting these subjects, and yet
I see it.
Their experience of aesthetic pleasure, and yet it's not the same as our aesthetic pleasure as viewers.
Exactly.
And that disconnect is so interesting. It's very, it's guarded in a sense.
Yeah, and I mean I think the guardedness or the protection of the individuals that I'm painting is also really important. And we can think about that in terms of the resolution of the work. The way that the surface isn't meant to be this bright, easy, simple, legible, completely clear image. And the cement won't even allow me to do that. The cement doesn't even allow me to be that detailed on the surface. So there's so much protection that goes in for the person so that, like, you know, our job is just like, we get to get a glimpse of seeing this joy. You know, are we experiencing this joy with them? No, I don't think so. Not always. But I think we actually get to see, like, this is real though. Like, this is real without me. This is real with me. This is real without me. You know what I mean? And that becomes really important.
Well, and I think that the effect of seeing these faces has a lot to do with your relationship to them, in the sense that, you know, you're not rendering an object into another medium, right? There's a tenderness in, you know, the rough surfaces that you are working with to make these faces. And I'm also addressing a question. I'm just going to like fold in some questions.
I love it.
General question about how your personal relationship in this kind of deep kinship that you feel shifts the identity of the faces we see from that of the sort of painterly subject into something else that I wonder if you have a name for. You know, how would you describe the people as other than the very loaded term of sort of portraiture subject? Because I think they're so much more than that.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I feel like, you know, I'm trying to think of like a really good like art historical example. I'm trying to think of, you know, a painter that painted their lover over and over and over again. You know, I'm thinking the only thing that comes to mind right now is when Picasso like broke up with his girlfriends, he would take the paintings back. That's the only thing I can think about right now. But that's not quite right. But I feel like they are. When I was at RISD, and because I didn't come to RISD doing figuration, I was really focused on abstraction, and through abstraction, I found figuration. And so, because we're not going for realism. We're not going for photorealism. I'm working from a process of abstraction. And so, when I was at RISD, you know, I realized that I was not seeing enough Black people. I miss my friends. And I was like, wow, what if I just like started conjuring them into this space? What happens if I start bringing them into the space with me? And, you know, as the portraiture got more and more tight, now, like when I finish a bust, it's like, wow, my brother is here sitting in the room with me. And it's and it becomes kind of crazy. It is, and it's weird. You know what I mean? Because to your point, like it isn't, so they're not just simple images, right? it isn't just like, we're just looking at an image of a person, they have more weight than that. And they take up more space in that, like sculpture. They transform the room, they transform space. And I think that that becomes really important. And I don't know what to say about that, honestly. I don't have a name for that. I mean, I think that is a part of what it is, though. I think that's a part of what
you've sort of summoned or called up or called in this familial community, right? In a way that we can only ever call on the people who we call family, right?
Exactly.
These are the people who would show up.
These are the people that hold you down. And I feel like these are the people that, I'm thinking a lot about like my family tree, my genealogy, like what do people actually look like in my family? Can I actually show them? Can I say their name? When they die, how did they live on? And I think we have to say their name. And I think this project becomes about that too. Just like, how do we actually just keep our family alive? Actually acknowledge our family, actually support our family, actually build real kinship. I feel like we're having a hard time, specifically because of COVID, especially because of COVID, connecting with each other. And so when you can create those spaces of meditation, create those spaces of reflection, create those spaces of connection, we should go for it. Yeah, am I getting at it? I feel like this is a very great, interesting question.
Yeah.
But family is like a complicated thing, and culturally, family means different things for different people. I grew up in a family, like my mom's side of the family, they're all very close. They talk to each other all the time. They hang out at every major holiday. And, and as I'm asking my mom for pictures of my family, I'm like, wait a minute, do we have enough pictures? And that's kind of the urgency in painting the people too, painting everyone too. It's like, oh wait, I need to like make a record of this. Yeah. This is actually really important.
It's memory making.
It's memory making. It's memory making for 3 generations from now, and it becomes important particularly with so many Black people dying. It's like, how do we actually memorialize the people we care about? How do we actually think about them? Actually, it makes me think about fayums, which are often portraits that are put on Egyptian sarcophaguses or Greek. There's a Greek version too, a Roman Greek version. And the images were meant to depict in an idealized form the person that passed away. And they were frescoes often, or painted on wood, sort of entombed and surrounded by cement, framed by cement. Yes, fayum mummy portraits, exactly. And that becomes a part of this project too. I'm thinking a lot about that language and a lot about memorialization.
So one of the things that I love about the way that your project constructs another layer to memorialization is that it's not only preserving the likeness of a person, but also preserving their private memory, right? Articulating their private vision that maybe as a viewer, we can't associate any meaning with. It's held in that space between their portrait and the landscape. One of the things that's interesting about fayum mummy portraits, which I love that you brought up, is that sometimes they're also created using encaustic, a sort of, a more liquid medium that hardens. And this is getting to another question from the chat, which has to do with, I know I'm multitasking, which has to do with working in flux with a medium like cement, which really changes minute by minute, especially the kind of cement that you use.
Exactly.
And how you deal with, it makes me anxious to think about it, how you deal with the fixing of that medium and what it gives you and what it stops giving you, or how that that surface transforms over the course of your manipulation of it.
This is a great question. I think the frame I'm going to use to talk about it is performance, because I feel like performance actually grounds at if you think about my practice across anything, is about performance. Mm-hmm. So it really becomes this dance between me and this medium, and I am responding in live time. I have about 45 minutes until it's going to be a hard brick. So like, you know, I have my drawing very specifically laid out, but I really am responding to this thing and carving in these gestures and moving this pigment around. What that looks like in terms of like adding paint, like, you know, I have to shift my tools throughout the process. Like about every 15 minutes, I'm shifting the kind of, what word? Like the kind of thickness of the paint. I'm the viscosity of the paint. I'm switching my brush. I'm switching, if I can still carve, I'm switching my carving tool. You know, I'm moving really from water into less water, into oil, into only oil, into more mediums, you know what I mean? And so it becomes like this really, really fast process. But you know, like I feel like actors, you know, when I was an actor, they say you have to be present on stage. You need to be present on stage. Presence, presence. And that's what this feels like. I have to be present with the material at all times. So when I'm working on a cement painting, until that cement painting is dry and hard, I can't do anything else. I'm just there working on it. I'm working on it. I'm moving it around. I'm making sure it's exactly how I want it. I'm adding stuff. I'm pushing stuff back. I'm, you know, and it just shifts.
Also negotiating with the material's own refusals of your efforts to control it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, I don't even, at this point now, I don't even try to control the cement. I feel like I just know what it does. And I just, you know, I'm like, okay, cool. Yes, I am gonna, I have to wait to add that color because I have to wait for it to actually get hard because I want to do this thing, you know, or I can't actually do this glaze that way, or I can't actually, oh, I waited a little bit too long, so I can't carve that in. You know what I mean? And then just making, so that's gonna change the way I do my image. You know, being flexible throughout the entire process, understanding what the achievement looks like, but being flexible throughout the entire process in order to make the object. It really is a dance, you know, and it's a fast dance too. And it becomes really, yeah, it's very fun.
Nice.
And it's, yeah, and they get heavy. Yeah, it's very fun. I'm like tugging them around. It's very physical. It really works for me. I feel like every artist, you know, finds a practice that works for them that actually is really reflective of their values. And I feel like somehow me lifting these heavy cement blocks and having to carve into the thing and, you know, building my own substrate, it really does feel perfect for me, you know? It really allows me to, yeah, really get at what I'm interested in formally.
Yeah, I love the idea of, you know, some houses are built out of cement blocks. I love the idea of sort of building, you know, these as a kind of cladding for a home, in a sense. I wanted to talk a bit about the actual installation of the works in the space and pacing and space between things. Everything from, you know, the cracks we see in concrete sidewalks to the space between the portrait and the landscape, the space between the slabs in the landscapes and the triptych. When you walk into the gallery, you encounter a portrait, then a landscape, a portrait landscape. At the end of the room, this beautiful triptych of all of the people combined, and then a kind of mirrored portrait landscape sequence on the other wall. And I'm curious because so many artists who, just thinking of like conceptual artists who were sort of sitting in the studio and realizing, like I think Mel Bachner said, you know, he said, I put up these 2 squares of paper trying to figure out what they were going to be. And I realized the space in between them was actually very interesting and in some ways held a whole lot of meaning that he never realized was there. And I think too, if we could extend that notion of the space between, you know, metaphorically to people's experiences in the past, their dealings with the present, right? The distance we put between ourselves right now by choice or by force, and the kind of negotiations of these 2 arenas. In both the way that your work is installed in the space, but also in how it's constructed, because it is fractured inherently because of how the size of the slabs that you pour. So what does that space in between mean for you?
Yeah, what a beautiful question. You know, the way that I think when there's a figure in the frame, when there's a figure in the frame and when there's not a figure in the frame, they sort of are doing different things for me, I think. When I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I tell this without giving a lot of information away? I feel like the crack can be, I think about the crack as violence, actually, particularly when there's a figure in the frame. That fracture that allows you to understand that this image is not real. We know this image isn't real, but to even push it further, like it can't actually be, it's the thing that keeps the image from feeling unified, from feeling
held together.
Truly held together, truly eternal, you know? And I think that fracture, and so it becomes the context, that fracture becomes the context around why the work is important. Because I'm trying to create these protected spaces for Black people where they don't have to experience this violence. And so that's interesting to me. I think with the landscapes, the fracture, particularly the fracture when it's working across the horizontal line, really makes me think about the horizon line. And I think in a really interesting way, because at times it gives you a false sense of what the horizon line wants to be. And so there's a tension between the actual horizon line in the painting and the horizon lines created by the objects. Sometimes they make it so it works out together, but I really do try to keep the tension there because I find it quite interesting because it separates the painting formally up into more parts. Suddenly something that's 2 parts feels now like 3 parts. And I think that's interesting to me. And yeah, I feel like the space in between are also like the space for memory, because the paintings are not, they are clear, they are legible, but they are not 100% high definition, you know? There's a lot of space for people to assume things, for people to fill in the gaps, you know? Like every blade of grass isn't drawn as a specific blade of grass, you know? There's space for the viewer to actually understand, how does this place connect to me? You mentioned that earlier, like, oh, it made me think about a real space that I know. And then suddenly you're looking at this painting, but you've actually filled in all the information from this space that you actually know. And so it makes the painting even more deep, you know? And so that becomes really important in the work. And I think that fracture also it gives you that space to do that.
What's interesting about, like one detail that I do want to point out is that it's not as if you've taken these slabs and intentionally fractured them yourself. You've assembled these slabs together, you know, with seams, right? That maybe that's like the more appropriate word here. And I think the seam and seaming is also something that applies really strongly to your work. But picking up on another comment in the chat, is the relationship between the triptych, a very strong relationship between the triptych as a format and altarpieces in Christianity.
Yes.
And the way that altarpieces are intended to didactically evoke a way
specific
of
message
seeing the world, yes, certain
like this
moral
is like
sentiments.
or
but
like
also
this
as
is what
something,
happened, you know what I mean?
Yeah, narrative and awe, and to trigger their own viewers' memory of their own kind of religious or kind of textual experience of reading, and then to kind of take that reminder and leave that space of worship, which is really powerful.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I want to talk about the color haint blue and its relationship to spiritualism. And I think it cycles back to why these do become kind of spiritual objects, and how that is something I'm in the process of about to run with, because it's so important to me. And the other thing to know is that I went to Catholic school for 13 years with nuns, with Black Jamaican nuns. And so I was at Mass every Wednesday. I definitely was an altar boy sometimes, but I'm not actually Catholic. But so I have this language embedded in my head, doing the Stations of the Cross and looking at the arches and the story of Jesus and the Passion of the Christ. Like, that becomes really important. So just to kind of give context about why I'm thinking about spiritualism, the color blue, haint blue, which is the color of crushed indigo leaves, is actually the color of the garments that each person is wearing, a kind of variation on that hue. And in the South, people paint ceilings of their verandas with this color, haint blue. And so in the South, it's said that if a spirit or a haint tries to enter your home, they will look up and see the ceiling of the veranda, think it's the sky, and be pulled away, cross over. So this haint blue becomes really, becomes kind of my entryway into thinking about the spiritual life of these people, and thinking about them as, with their relationship to spirituality and spiritualism, and this kind of mythicalness, and this holiness, and this, yeah. So with that in mind, I am thinking about them in terms of these like, these altar pieces. I'm trying to think about, I did a piece called Warrior at Rest, and it presented a figure in a haint blue garment that I made, lying in a field. And some people were like, oh, that looks like the Christ at rest. And that became like, and that was interesting to me because, there is so much, when we think about, particularly images from the Byzantine Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, those images kind of show these figures, like dark figures in these kind of sanctified, holy, elevated spaces. And I'm thinking a lot about that. Anyway, it's kind of, these are things that I'm thinking about, and like, I don't know, I don't want to, anyway, things are happening. There are going to be some more paintings, and yeah, I'm excited to share what I'm thinking about.
Well, I know that we have just a few minutes left, and I feel like if anybody has extra questions that I didn't nab from the chat while we were talking, please throw them into the Q&A or the chat now, whatever you want. Because I love the idea of thinking about your relationship to haint blue as a kind of protective atmosphere, and the immersiveness of, like, architecturally of blue when it's used. I'm thinking too of like domes, cathedral domes, as well as in the porch roofs of the South. And thinking about transposing that field onto the vertical surface of the wall, and enveloping us in some way with that. But I know that you are thinking more theatrically about blue in current and future projects. And I wondered if there aren't any other questions that come in, maybe if you want to talk about where you're going with that.
Yeah, so maybe this is the perfect place. So basically the haint blue and the images from the paintings are all sort of being fed by an opera that I'm actually writing. And this opera it takes place in an imaginary landscape in Alabama, an imaginary rural landscape in Alabama. And really becomes the space that I'm world building, the imagery that I'm building in the paintings. I don't know if I have time to share a video or not, but I have a video where basically I'm wearing a garment and I'm holding a comb and I'm singing a song that basically sets the stage for many of the things that you're seeing in the paintings and the other things that are to come. Maybe we should just hold it. Maybe we should just
you should share it. Let's do it.
Oh, okay.
Let's do it.
Wisely stumbles and climbs up the second pillar under the tresses of a petite pine. Before passing through the screens, white yelps, "Ah, what's going on?" X clumsily stirs as YZ enters their club. The haint fell into focus and X gasps, "Grandmother!" X had never seen the haint appear. Only the sky carries such a color, unless the key bearer, the head of the family, flies away. Mother, oh my baby, this is true. The day has come and it all turned blue. But yes, your grandma's gone. She has fled. Wife plops out of the stack and onto the tiles to grab the leg of their grandmother's youngest child. You remember when I told you one day when you grew, everyone you knew would be wearing a faint blue, just like the sky. Ain't you remembered you smiled? You wondered what would happen to a sky with no clouds. I said, imagine that sky as clear as can be, a sky with no fears or worries, a sky free. Well, baby, your grandma is high, feeling the sky. It's like a cloud setting up, looking down, and the next time it rains, she'll fall again to water the earth here with us.
Yeah, so that's the clip. So basically, I am working on this opera. It's sort of my really long-term project, and it's very much feeding in. Yeah, so every garment that you see, I'm oftentimes making the garment in the garment in the painting I've actually made. Some imagery that I'm thinking about, the narrative, the story is that the opera is driving or showing up in the painting. So it becomes this really clear back and forth in terms of world building for me. And I'm excited to share that. The colors become really important. The importance of the same message about freedom and choice and Black independence without high surveillance, land ownership, community building, all of those same things that I'm talking about in my paintings are sort of being manifested in the opera. So they everything works together. And that's how this practice works.
So exciting. What phase in development are you of the opera?
Yeah, so I'm still writing. I'm basically writing. I'm working on a trio right now, and so I'm trying to wrap up the first act in the next couple of months, and then I want to just sort of do a run through the first act, and then finish the second act. Right now, I'm sort of performing everything as a solo show with me singing all the various characters' parts. But in a couple of years, once I have the whole book figured out, I'm gonna hopefully have other people in it. And it's gonna be this sort of fuller fledged thing.
Wow, that's really exciting. Some kind of total theater.
Yes, I know, exactly. I'm so excited.
Great.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for moderating and asking these brilliant questions. Thank you, Jarrett, for your gift. I remember when you played that opera for me during our studio visit in August. I think if you played that recording, my jaw's just on the floor. Or I have one where I'm like, oh my God. It just blew my mind. And that's something I love about meeting artists, is realizing how multifaceted their practices are. And you truly, truly embody that.
Thank you.
So we will wrap up because it's exactly 8 o'clock, and we will let people get on with their night. But I hope everyone had a great time. And I can't wait to see everybody at some point in the future, safely and in person at the gallery or somewhere else in public. I hope everyone stays safe, everyone stays healthy, and let's all just keep connecting and, following Ellen's work, following Jarrett's work, following the work of the gallery. We're here to support each other and to create something really beautiful and really connected, I think, between everybody. So, hi, Sharina Gordon. I've also loved meeting or just getting to know Jarrett's chosen family. And and also some of the sitters. I mean, everyone is just such an incredible intelligent person. Like, they're all doing incredible things and kind of community minded things as well. So I think that reflects a lot on Jarrett and Jarrett's mindset on who they like to have in their life.
Yes.
Yeah, that's important, right? You can connect
I
yourself
think
with
so.
good people. And I just want to say congrats to Ellen, who got married during the pandemic. So,
Woo! Yes, Mabruk.
all right, y'all. We're gonna say bye. This will be recorded and shared, so that will be sent to you at some point soon. And have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.